Even know what the countdown was. Hello, hello. Pete Oslin, Eric Staley here with Bending Rules, where we talk about all things entrepreneurial. And I do mean all things. Like occasionally we want to talk about just not the business side of being an entrepreneur, but the other sort of aspects to it, right? Like, what we hear about work-life balance, like how do entrepreneurs deal with relationships. And so, today we might cover a few of those other things in addition to some other aspects that we wanted to talk about with some of the guys that we've had on over the last couple of weeks. So Eric and I were talking about, the fact that we've entered like 4 or 5 entrepreneurs in the last several podcasts, and there's a lot of good data that comes across in those sessions. And I'm imagining not everybody that's listening to this today or last week can hear all those sessions, right? And so we thought, let's do one podcast sort of dedicated, or part of it dedicated to breaking some of this down. Like what were the main takeaways from these guys? And I think it'll be interesting because your takeaway might be a little bit different than my takeaway. And so in prepping for this, which is probably the most prep we've ever done, it's impressive. I sent Eric a text.
You prepped it. Oh,
okay. And you prepped it.
Well, I was supposed to. All right.
So I sent him a text. And I say, hey Eric, can you just give me like a 1-word description, and we'll build off this on each of the guys that we've had on. Like, what word comes to mind when you think about, Jeff, Maggie that we interviewed, or Fired Fox? And if we just go through each of those words, I think it'll give us a basis for an entrepreneur or anybody listening to this to, have a sense of sort of, the main takeaway from that segment or that podcast. The other thing I sort of want to also throw out a little bit, because we're going to go into another direction today where we talk about, Eric and I were just talking about this a minute ago, are entrepreneurs actually more happy than non-entrepreneurs, right? And so does this journey, as you proceed down it, does it lead to a scenario where ultimately you could potentially be more happy? Now, again, I don't want to normalize that across every industry, every business, or non-entrepreneur versus entrepreneur, because it's not going to, it's going to vary depending. You could be in a job that you love and you work in a huge company, right? So, but I'm going to tell Eric and share with Eric a little bit what I found out along those lines. I think that'd be kind of an interesting thing to look at. The other thing too is that it kind of bothers me. One thing that's always bothered me about the entrepreneurial discussion is in society we really, we really revel, or we really promote the entrepreneur. Like they're you always see it's like, oh, like Bezos, or just one person did this. Even with the people we have on, it always sounds like, their journey. But for me, what I want to broaden the definition of an entrepreneur. I think it's anybody that works with that person early on. I mean, yeah, I was the co-founder or founder of several companies, but what about the first 10 people that are in that company? I mean, aren't they being entrepreneurial? I mean, they're taking risk, and they don't know if this company is going to be around. Maybe I'm asking them to work for less. They're getting stocks and stuff like that. And so I don't know. And that's my own way of kind of looking out, is because I know I have some friends and colleagues that are listening to this. People that have worked with me, like, my first vice president of client services, my head of sales, like they're entrepreneurial too. So when I come back and talk about entrepreneurial happiness, I want to include those people in the bucket. All right. I just set up the podcast today. I kind of jumped around a lot. I realized that, but those are the kind of what I hope to hit on today. And I want to jump into you and say, yo, Eric, tell me about these first. Let's start with whoever you want to start with. Like, what's the one word that comes to mind? Like, I don't know let's take Jeff. Let's start with Jeff. Like, what did you take away from that as your kind of, that you think was important on his podcast?
Yeah. I mean, kind of panning back out, even not as specific to each individual, but the term or the phrase that I think of when I'm trying to see what we're doing here and what I'm trying to get out of it is data chunking. And it's a statistical kind of a background, if that makes sense. So yeah. It's like another way of saying it is stereotyping.
Yeah.
And it has a negative connotation, but data chunking is really important to me. And I've done my best to be a data chunker my whole life. And to try to be able to pick out what a good business would be to succeed at, or, a price to earnings ratio, or an individual that you would hire that would show up
Yeah.
and do a good job. I try to, and it's a lot of stereotyping, but it's also data chunking. And so I feel like with this situation, I'm liking the idea of trying to put all this data, all these interviews into a kind of a bucket and see if anything if you could squeeze anything out of that.
Yeah.
And I mean, our sample size is too small right now.
Yeah.
To really, I mean, I can't be too definitive, but
yeah, that's cool.
But I'm enjoying the hell out of this as far as, just getting an average of different cats. And like Byron, as an example, confused me, like I didn't really see that chip on his shoulder.
Yeah.
And he took off on a business that he wasn't necessarily passionate about.
Yeah.
And he's killing it. And I'm thinking about, I just assumed you had to be passionate, and you had maybe probably to have a chip on your shoulder. And,
yep.
And I was wrong. And so I'm enjoying kind of some of my wrong assumptions because that helps, fine tune my data chunking or my stereotypes.
Dude, that's a great point. I mean, what you just raised there, because it was, for me, you've heard me refer to this as like pattern recognition.
Yeah.
I'm like, what is the patterns across all these people? And I was, and I love that, we're admittedly at a small sample size now. Fast forward a couple, 2-3 years, however long we continue to do this, we might have 100 or 150 people that we've sat down here with. And so that data set is going to become tighter, but intuitively, you sort of know some things or you recognize some things. So before we get into individuals, now that you're sort of going down this thread, because I was having the same thought, Eric, I was like, oh, that's interesting because this person didn't have a chip on their shoulder, but there were some things that I still felt were in common, right? And so like one of them was this whole concept of domain expertise, meaning that most of the people we've talked to so far, entrepreneurs we've talked to, they've sort of, I don't want to say stumbled into their path of entrepreneurism, but it's been adjacent to something they're already doing that they have domain expertise in. Okay, so you take like Chris Capdevila we had on last week at Oracle, but he was in this consulting company that was sort of consulting on the concepts and the products and services that he then went out and started a company around, right? Bayard, while it's manufacturing, it's still in the housing industry, sort of adjacent to making a real estate investment. Then you make the next one and the next one. I mean, you can go on and on with these guys, right? So we tend to, so the entrepreneurs operate, they don't get there right away. It might be 6-7 years of building domain expertise in some cases. I'm a lawyer by training. I mean, I like technology. I mean, I was around, law firms I went into legal technology, right? It was a domain that I felt like I had expertise in. Now, there's another class of entrepreneurs where you just get the idea and you just start it, right? And it's like some crazy consumer idea or a widget or whatever. Maybe the mad scientist kind of entrepreneur working in their garage or whatever. This isn't a premise I have at this point. I don't know if it's, I can support it yet, but I'm gonna argue that percentage of entrepreneurs, number one, is less number of people that are entrepreneurs like that. Number two, I'm going to suggest that I think their failure rate's a lot higher because some of the things I've listened on these entrepreneurs that have failed, and trust me, I'm in the failure category too with some of these things. Like they just kind of went out and did something that they thought would be cool, but they're not really in that domain. They're not around that industry. Does that make sense? So from a pattern recognition, so far what I've seen this domain expertise. And the other thing, I've seen, Eric, that I've thought about while I'm having each of these people sit in this chair, I've thought, well, shoot, any of these guys could have been successful, guys or gals. I mean, whoever we end up having on here could have been successful in any given industry had they had the domain expertise.
Yeah. Yeah. You could plug them into a different aspect and, yeah, as long as they have that drive.
As long as they have whatever these characteristics are that, we think are, I call it pattern recognition. You call it, I don't know what you
data chunking.
Data chunking. I like it. However,
just a different way of saying
however you want to chop it up, right?
Yeah.
And so what else did you see in the data chunking process? Were there any parallels that you felt? I mean, you identified some that weren't, with Byard, which I thought was interesting, but anything else jump out at you?
Yeah, well, that's the ones that I was wrong on were probably more outstanding to me. The other ones were, people having a chip on their shoulder and a passion, a drive, a relentlessness, all the things the adjectives that kind of keep coming back around. And that was more consistent with the other characters, but Bayard just kind of threw me off.
Yeah.
And so the other guys kind of fit more into my bucket of what I think,
yeah,
I could expect to see. But these are all different industries too. So, I'm around a bunch of real estate guys, like 3/4 of my buddies that, that are business dudes, they're actually in real estate, and sort of similar aspect to what I do. We're not all that different. None of us are even close to the same, but we're very similar. Now, when you get into starting a business, that could be anything under the sun, software companies and fire pits. And I mean, it's just, this is fun. I mean, this is interesting because it's all over the place. I wasn't expecting it to be so diverse.
Yeah. And I have a feeling it's going to become even more diverse in some regards. Now, having said that, when I was forced to kind of do the exercise and think about each one of these individuals, I'll kind of jump in with some words that stood out. And I thought there were some traits that were a little bit different with everybody, as much as we identify the patterns too. And I wouldn't say like some of these, it's not that the other entrepreneur doesn't have this trait. It's just that it's stronger in one person than it is the other. Yeah. And they may have another strength that they may leverage as a trait to enable them to be successful. So again, in this context, for anybody listening, I think if you're in the process of starting something, or you have started something that's not going well, or, who knows, you might be here 10 years from now, you're going to play to your strengths. Ultimately, that's what we do in life. Right. And often our strengths could be our domain. It could be something in our skill set. And then you got to find ways to fill the holes of where you don't have strengths, or you just don't have the time to do. Right. Yeah. Because you and I talked about before. Yeah. You're going to try to do everything initially, and that's probably going to work for a while until you hit burnout. Mm-hmm. And even when you get the people that can help you with these different skills, you're still potentially could hit burnout because you're, a workaholic entrepreneur. And, that's something we talked about before, and we'll come back to kind of at some point in the balance of this whole thing. But here, I just want to throw out some words that came to mind with different people, because we're tested differently, right, as entrepreneurs. So like with Bayard Fox, who was the Cement Elegance manufacturing company, I'll start with him. I came up with the word resilience because, he was tested in a way of like 12 years with a business that he built up to be a pretty big, successful flooring business, regional flooring business. And we talked about that. And then you had the partnership fallouts and all that. So I think you said kind of early in that podcast, I mean, you're kind of like, this is the guy that got, the fighter that got knocked out in the first round TKO. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And you were like, how's he going to get back up? Yeah. So some other entrepreneurs, we all have resilience, but in some people need to leverage that more than others. So because other entrepreneurs may have what we commonly refer to as like beginner's luck, right? They may get out of the gate, get a couple of clients, and they think, oh, this is great. And now I'm going to quit my job and do this. And maybe so that encourages them. And later on, year 4 or 5, there's a recession. Then they got to build resilience, right? But that trait jumped out with me a lot. And I don't know.
Resilience.
That was kind of the word. And I don't know if you agree with that, or you had something else that you thought was, kind of stood out. But
no, that was outstanding. His ability to get knocked out and just pop right back up. You ever watch that Simpsons episode when Homer becomes a boxer?
No. I don't even need to watch it to start laughing though, dude. March, I'm going to start training like.
and then there's a Mike Tyson kind of guy that comes through town, eventually, because he's already won a few fights. Well, Homer can't lose for whatever reason. This comes to my mind is that Homer can't lose because you can't knock him out. And I'm like, if you got that kind of
too dumb to be knocked out, or too thick of a head,
this has nothing to do with you, at all. But it was just like his resilience in that situation was outstanding. Eventually, this Mike Tyson kind of guy, punches himself out, and Homer just kind of pushes on his forehead and he falls over because he's so tired. You know what I mean? But
yeah.
There's characters out there,
so he wins that way,
that have that kind of grit, that kind of resilience that can't be shut down. And I don't know how you know that. How would you see that in a person, without really, from a distance, I guess, without knowing them real well. Yeah. Unless they're your brother or somebody that you spend a lot of time in life with. I mean, I want to be able to pick that out in a crowd.
I think your skin is thickened over time, though. So like that person that's able to withstand a 10-year, cycle and still bounce back, having a lot of success and then not working out, but are willing to bounce back. I mean, maybe they, maybe they had something in their past. In fact, I was just reading something on this early on, which is, and I don't know if you can kind of correlate it to like doing something athletically when you're young, but when you and I have talked about this delayed gratification is kind of a resilience concept where you've worked hard at something already and seen that it took a lot of failures to have success, right?
Know how to trust the process. You ever hear coaches say that? Trust the process.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, we're going to do all this work and we're going to do all this stuff to not get penalties. And then we're going to learn the playbook. Just trust the process and it will work. We'll get there if we work harder than other teams.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the same case in business.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you actually apply yourself in the right direction. And God, the luck aspect it wrecks my head though, how much that's a factor,
Yeah.
I mean, you start a business early in 2007, just before the Great Recession, there's nothing you could, I mean, maybe people did and they probably survived. Let's find those guys and have a conversation with them. But the odds are just crazy low that you're going to pull through if you're right on the precipice of a recession. And everybody seemed to be pretty humble about luck.
Yeah.
That we've talked to so far, which I appreciate. I'm glad they shared that too.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of the stuff you hear in business and, how to become an entrepreneur is, advice from somebody who's like, I've never made a mistake and I can't lose. And there was no luck. I mean, maybe a little bit, it was just me. And that's kind of confusing, I think, for people.
Yeah, it is. You wonder if it's a little bit of like a revisionist history too. They've had all this success.
Nice.
And then they kind of look back and go like, oh yeah, well I did all these things, forgetting how much luck you needed to have along the way.
Yeah.
Right. Like the little things that happened that, made it fortune. Like even a person they were able to hire for some reason because they met them through somebody as they were visiting their hometown. Like, something that wouldn't have, that took a little bit of luck or I don't know, you can call it serendipity or whatever. I mean, just, that sort of thing happening to make it to factor in. And no, I agree. I think most people do recognize that. And I think most entrepreneurs recognize that because they've had enough failure too, right? Mm-hmm. So they understand that, they're the same person with the same skill set and they failed at something. And so it must have had what was different before. Like you can learn what was different. You and I have talked about this before, like, you got to be passionate about your thing. It at least was one of my formulas, ingredients. And I wasn't with another venture, but then some of it was luck, like, not being around a recession and the second business I had, I was kind of like one of those. It wasn't, thankfully I wasn't monetarily into it as much, but it happened just right before the tech recession essentially. And, then you had valuations, everything change and, investors, down rounds and all the stuff that's kind of happened in the last year or two in that particular industry. And that takes people out. That takes companies out. That takes cap tables out. An entrepreneur that had, 20% of the company now because they got to raise money at a less valuation, they're going to have 10%. They've already been working at it for, 10 years. I mean, that's, and, their sort of projected outcome was based on having 20% by virtue of what they gave up to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you deal with the circumstances that you have now, not what you wanted them to be, but that's a little bit, maybe a lot of it of luck, so.
Well, another angle on the characters that we've had on the show so far too is I feel like we're just breaking the ice, and kind of breaking the seal. And I think there's quite a few more drop-down menus that we could get into with each one of those characters. I mean, I could see 4 or 5 podcasts with each one of them to really distill it even deeper and further. I think an hour just getting going is kind of just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
So I don't have a ton of.
It's amazing what you gain in an hour, though. So like, I'll give you another one, like with Jeff Maggie, who's kind of your good friend, the real estate developer and development companies and all this kind of stuff. And he to me was like the characteristic that stood out with Jeff. We kept using this acronym RFN.
I love that. Yeah.
Right. Fucking now.
Yeah. That's how it was with me.
He was like that RFN, that action oriented guy. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Juxtapose that to Chris Capdevila, who I felt like he was more a deliberate entrepreneur. Like, and I'm not saying Jeff isn't deliberate in his investments and all this stuff, but he kept on sort of one of his things he kept sort of suggesting to younger entrepreneurs was just you can do it right now. Like, what are you waiting for? Why don't you have 2, 3? I mean, and it kind of makes you go like, well, hold on, I don't know if I could. That seems like a lot. I mean, I don't have the money. And he's like, well, you don't need it. Here's how you structure it. We got in some tactical stuff like with contracts and stuff, which by the way, like, I feel like sometime I'm going to get into some more tactics down the road of stuff that was done because, when you talk about this stuff at a high level, it helps. Like you start to get their traits and characteristics, but sometimes I want, people need just tactics too. And that's what I liked about what Jeff had to say about, there's a section of his podcast, if anybody that didn't listen to, you go back and listen to, where he went into some specifics, how he got into these and I was like, oh, well, this is really cool. Mm-hmm. I sort of digress, but my point is he was an action oriented guy. So I'd say, okay, that's one of his traits that enabled him to get out there and do it. And then I look at Chris, 7 years or whatever at Price Waterhouse. And then he he sees something and he's very deliberate about moving. Then he moves in he just strikes me as more deliberate than going right in. And I don't know where he put you or where I put myself in that equation, somewhere in the middle. So anyway, that was one that's what jumped out at me with Chris. And then I'd say with John Kelly, another entrepreneur, had small business and did his real estate, investments and did really well with those. And I don't know, he just kind of struck me as a guy, and I know you know him better, but I would say I look at my read on his, I call them the superpowers of these entrepreneurs, but he was just kind of opportunistic guy. Like he knew how to take advantage of opportunities that were happening in the market.
Yeah.
And you're probably that way too, but I didn't see him. My read wasn't on him like he was just RFN, like Jeff, like I'm going to do it right now. Like he was like, no, Midtown's developing or whatever, however he got into stuff. Like he has this sort of ability to be opportunistic and make the moves at the right time, and I thought that was a pretty good takeaway.
He's patient on his purchases.
Yeah.
And be willing to walk away is one of the things that he said about a deal, and boy, he lives it. There's deals going on all day, every day, and he's not quick to jump on something until it gets really good, and it's tactical. It's chess-like,
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a really good read on that. But he's not busy all the time. He doesn't need to be busy. That's why I said that work-life balance that John has.
Yeah.
is remarkable. It's remarkable.
Yeah.
He does it left-handed, and he makes enough to survive. And now he's quite a ways past that, just enough to survive. But even during the Great Recession, there were some struggles in that period of time where it was still, you're watching what you've accumulated to diminish, and you realize that first chunk is the hardest chunk.
Yeah.
To actually reestablish, and the rug got pulled out of both of our feet in the Great Recession, and John was struggling too. And but then he just stayed the course and waited for opportunities and bought again when he could and reestablished any kind of banking connections because the bank stopped lending.
Yeah.
More or less during the Great Recession.
Absolutely.
So then he had to find money somewhere or wait for the banks to come back around. It was a really interesting thing. But in the end, the John Kelly story is his work to his freedom of schedule ratio it's as good as anybody could ever imagine. And, he's not wildly wealthy, but he might as well be.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing that he wants for.
You're kind of bringing me to what I was hoping you and I would chat a little bit about today. And we started this out a little bit, at the beginning of the pod, but which is this, the work-life balance, the happiness equation. Some of this is pretty squishy for me because I feel like in the years that you're building something, maybe those things get sacrificed a little bit. And then also just in terms of what people want and need are different too. So happiness can translate for someone differently, right? Like depending on what their expectations are to attain happiness. So I started kicking around on this maybe even 6 months ago when, I did that one pod on the kind of middle age and why we become less happy as we get older. And so that kind of got me thinking, okay, well, how much does that apply to someone that's an entrepreneur versus not an entrepreneur? And then is the balance thing just as important as the money thing or the relationship thing, or which one of those things is most important? And it doesn't even need to be most, but
It'd be individual, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be individual, but is there some sort of normalization to that? Okay, so I read this. I'll kind of set it up with this guy's theory that, and it was called. I can't forget this book. I came across this. Oh, it was called, the book was called. This guy done a study on happiness, and it was like basically his conclusion was get married or be in a long-term relationship.
Yeah.
And his thing was people are at the core of happiness. Like, so that was his deal. And the rest of it, according to this, this book or this author, was that, that's all helpful too and everything like that. And I was, as I was reading this, I basically read an article that was talking about a summary of this. So I didn't read the whole book in fairness to the author, but I kind of went like, I don't know about that, man. I don't know if that resonates really. Like, is that, I think it's an important piece. Like I love the fact you got to have having a relationship in life leads to a higher level of happiness and a longer term one potentially. Like, and again, that's not true for everybody. This is just this guy's normalized thing. But there's things that were missing from that for me. And one of the things we're missing was like what you just talked about, was the work-life balance, which I think another guy referred to this as like your social fitness or something, like your ability to do whatever it is you need to do, like hike a mountain or, go on a float or have, go to concerts or travel or whatever. So that's you need that too. Right? I'm thinking these legs of the stool. And the one that everybody doesn't like talking about is money. and I think it's sort of seen as this sort of, when people are put in a place where it's just, they disproportionately have more, it kind of makes it feel like, I don't know,
Mr. Smithers,
that they're undeserving, or
they're evil,
or whatever.
There's stigma. Yeah,
there's stigma with it, and I feel like I just want to be clear on some things. I think money is, for me, I'll say, and also from what I found with some of the evidence, I think it's an important leg in the stool to happiness, because it provides for the social fitness of all those other, the other things that you want to do, travel, whatever. So, and this later on, when I came to find out, when I did a bit more research on this, I think it was called like the Easterlink paradox. And you talked about, more money, you make more money, you're happier up until a point, and then it starts to diminish.
Yeah.
And this guy's thing was that even that's not totally true. He's like, actually, more allows for you to have these freedoms. And so, but, that not having a relationship, not having the work-life balance, like if, let's say you're just, all you are is a workaholic and you make ton of money, probably not happy there too. Right. And so I feel
like that could be a black hole, actually, of just chasing the money.
Yeah.
I feel like that's maybe even a path to not being very happy.
I
but
agree.
I don't have anything to back that up or support it.
Yeah.
It seems like, well, the balance, work life and then family and friends, and that mix is important to me, and I see for most people it's important, because if they become just a function of money, and that's the only way you can score, get that dopamine hit, hit that next level.
Yeah.
Well, gosh, it never ends, and the money isn't really doing anything for you except for that next dopamine hit. But I just like getting the hits off of other stuff, like surfing or,
and relationships too, right?
Of course. Yeah.
And like, I think just having a successful entrepreneur, endeavor and not having anybody to share that with, or good friends, or even a close partner, as this guy was suggesting, I think overall it sort of stratifies to being less happy. So, I guess my main takeaway from some of that was I agree with it to an extent, but I also think that, I had monetary goals at a young age because I knew that they would mean a certain outcome. Now, I didn't want to do something that I didn't enjoy, that didn't give me the work-life balance to achieve those, but I wasn't absent those. Like, so at least you're aspiring to something you think could provide this sort of, I don't know, umbrella to gain happiness and all the things that you really love to do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think so.
Travel or whatever, or do you disagree? Like, am I kind of mischaracterizing that, or how would you characterize it?
I think it's for me, and I think we're similar enough that I had things I like to do outside of work, and I didn't like not being able to do it every day that I wanted to, or your weekend comes up and it's raining, or it's foggy that day, or there's no new powder on the mountain, but it's the weekend, so you go skiing, And that was driving me crazy because I couldn't actually orchestrate my life around the fun stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a whole lot different than you. It's earn enough money so you can get out of the game so you can, sort of dictate, how and where you have your fun.
Yeah.
That's priceless.
Yeah.
But after that, I'm actually not that motivated by money.
Yeah.
Like you get to that stage.
Yeah.
For me, I'm trying to figure out what to do, like as far as my focus, a little bit to your, last podcast, turning 50 and then what do you do? And if you're not chasing the dragon financially, then you're
how else are you fulfilling yourself and being happy?
Yeah.
To achieve this sort of happiness state, if you will.
It's tricky too, because you're getting older.
Yeah.
And everybody's going to get older. So, when you're 30 and you think, oh, I can earn money when I'm in my 50s or whatever. Well, you might think about that a little harder and go after it now. RFN, right? Fucking now.
Yeah.
According to, Maggie, because
you and I are like, okay, so any entrepreneur I feel that, let's say, has gotten to a point in their career, they're in their 50s and they've had some, the financial outcomes. But I also feel like it's important to say along the way, we were still living our lives in a somewhat balanced way. It wasn't just like, oh, I now made this. Part of the entrepreneurial journey was so I could do those things along the way.
Oh, yeah.
And create a structure where it would allow me to do that. And I'm very grateful that piece worked out because, while it's not the way that your business starts, it's eventually you got to pull back and avoid burnout and try to operate that way. And I'm not sure there's a good percentage of entrepreneurs that don't pull back and do that, right? They continue to operate in that same level of intensity or whatever and not enjoy the fruits of the labor, for lack of a better way to say it, kind of. So, that's one of the drivers. But I think you and I are predisposed to saying, hey, entrepreneurs are happy because, we have these things. We have work-life balance. Maybe we have a good relationship that supports us in our journeys. That, again, I consider those people, spouses, partners, they're my co-founders too,
100%.
Even though they're not listed as that, because they're right there with you, but that helps you through the journey. But we're predisposed to say, hey, entrepreneurs are more happy. So I wanted to do a little bit of research on this. I guess the burning question I've got on this subject is, do you think entrepreneurs are more happy than non-entrepreneurs? I'm setting you up right there without any data, but
that's the story of my life.
I wanted to just throw you to the wolves on that, because I know you're going to be predisposed to be like, anyway, because you're happy, generally speaking. But it's interesting what I found out from my cursory research. But I'm curious what you think. Like, do you think they're more happy than non-entrepreneurs, and if so, why or why not? Or do you just don't have an opinion on it? That's fine too.
Oh man, I could kind of play around with it if nothing else, and just sort of guess that maybe entrepreneurs maybe start out less happy than other folks because they probably have some dragon that they want to slay or some chip on their shoulder.
Yeah.
And they want to prove something to somebody. And then the real question is when they come out the other side and they've actually slayed the dragon, they're financially free.
Yeah.
Are they happier then? It's an individual thing. I really do think it assuming that they're successful, if they got into the treadmill of chasing just a bigger number in their bank account.
Yeah.
I don't think so. There's something missing there if that's all they're still chasing. But if they have a balance of any kind amongst that, I would suspect that they've got money behind them, and life is easier without that concern.
Yeah.
It's not perfect, but it's easier.
I'm trying to I'm stepping back for both you and I, because you kind of said maybe at first they're not as happy. I still go back to the premise of regardless of making money, one of the things that drives you down this path is the fact that you already want some things that you're not willing to wait for, right? And it's less about most of it's about what you and I have talked about before, freedom of schedule, right? And so if I didn't have that right away in the journey, or pretty close to, even though I could still work 12, 14 hours a day, but if I had freedom of when I could do that, I was happier than if I had a job that was 9 to 5.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
I'm jealous of the newbies out there with these tech jobs.
Yeah.
Where they're in their van running around to, Baja and different places and still working. I'm like,
so
what?
I would bet that the worker these days, the non-entrepreneur, is happier than the worker 25 years ago because of that freedom of schedule. That would be one of the things I would. I mean,
Wow.
that'd be one of the things I'd bet. The other thing, but the second thing I would say, that only gets you so far, right? If you're doing that work and you don't love your work and you don't love your boss, you don't love your company and its mission or the colleagues or whatever it is, you got all this freedom to schedule. You're not going to be as happy as the entrepreneur or those that are part of that mission or journey with that entrepreneur that enjoy what they're doing, enjoy the people that they're doing, have similar values to those people. You see what I'm saying? Like those are the other things that are contributing that I think could be lacking just because you have the freedom to schedule in a non-entrepreneurial job, let's say.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's a tricky, if I like going back in time, like to your point, if I would have had all that flexibility at some job that I was in, maybe it would have been enough. And you know what? And I wouldn't have had to take these risks. And, you know, because like you said, money only gets you to a certain point. And by the way, when you take the risk, there's no guarantee it's going to work out, even if they're smartest entrepreneur in the world, right? So I can understand why people don't, right?
Yeah.
So, man, it's just it's a tricky question. I get it, you know. Now the evidence says that entrepreneurs are more happy than non-entrepreneurs.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, that's sort of what the evidence that I found out. But there was a but in there. The but was they also are more predisposed to be depressed.
Interesting.
And
Predisposed.
yeah, well, because they have more exposure to like financial, you know, calamities or just stress essentially along the way,
Mm-hmm.
which could also, maybe these are inverse to each other, I don't know, but could also put stress on a relationship, you know, or it starts with the stress of the relationship because you're not around, and then you also have financial. So you could see where some of those things could push an entrepreneur in a scenario to be, yeah, they're happy because they're doing what they want to do, they got freedom of schedule, but they were more inclined to be just depressed than non-entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So I kind of went back in time. I said, well, do I fit that profile? And, you know, honestly, I probably do. Like, I think there were times when I was entrepreneuring, like I might have got really down, you know, like when shit hit the fan or my business was failing or I wasn't seeing success fast enough. This wasn't necessarily true of my last venture with Manzama that I didn't start till I was 40, but I'm sure it had its dark nights, but gosh, everything previous to that, yeah, I was happy, but there were times where I felt like, holy shit, because I had these other pressures, you know, that I don't think I know are, they're not the scenarios for non-entrepreneurs typically, unless they do something like get themselves in bad investments and stuff like that. I'm talking about around your business, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. Happier, but not, or but have a could be exposed to this phenomenon, you know. So part of the reason why I want to chat with you about this, like, I'm curious, like, do you feel that's true? Have you seen that either for yourself or others that you know? And then, because I think, you know, one of the things, you know, Eric, for me, like even doing this podcast, just what I've always loved about you and I just rapping is that we just call it how we see it, you know, and I want people to get the, you know, the clear perspective on this. It's not like it's all like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
everything's just rosy and glory. Like it's rough sometimes.
That's the best part about, I think,
You know?
what we're trying to do is the real deal. I mean, if anything, you can model it towards is to be as similar to The Millionaire Next Door. It's almost data driven, and the reality of it behind that with numbers or your own ability to data chunk from listening to enough entrepreneurs to pick up
Yeah.
on something. And happiness is a factor. I mean, chasing money was for freedom of schedule, of course, but that was to basically make you a little bit happier.
Yeah.
You know, you're always chasing that happy button, seeing how far you can take it.
Yeah.
You know, before your head explodes, and you know, it turns out my head never exploded. You know, I got far enough along, but I wasn't really too depressed during the process.
Yeah.
But there are exceptions for sure, because I did most of my work by myself.
Yeah.
You know, so I'd buy a place and I'd demo it. You know, like the inside, whatever I was going to work on, I'd do the demo section. And about the time I got done with the demo, I get depressed on every one of those projects, because at that stage of the game, I knew there was so much work to bring it all back, because the demo's easy.
And there's financial investment we're going to have to make in time of your own.
You're in deep. at that point. We've
Right?
got this place demo. There's no turning back.
And I think that's what creates the potential exposure to feel this, because not only were you in deep personally in your case, but I'm talking about, like in my particular case, I'm in deep because I've got now investors, some of which are close family and friends, which oftentimes that's the only place you're getting your seed money from. So now you're going to carry that on you. I guess to some extent, the reputation of failing publicly, gets carried on you. That never really motivated me. Like, I didn't really care about that because I don't care about what other people think, but that might factor in for someone else. Like, oh, I'm going to fit, if this fails and everybody knows it, but blah, blah, blah. But there's these different kind of, things that can weigh on you.
Oh, absolutely.
At those periods. And
well, it wasn't uncommon for me to be finished with this demo, and it would be at night. I'd been working in it. I just lost track of time, and I look out and it's dark, and I'm in the house by myself, and I'm sitting there going, okay, now I need to do a material list and go to Home Depot or Lowe's and get all this material just so I could be ready the next day. I didn't want to start by going to Home Depot. So my night kept going, and then I hadn't eaten, and they're probably bonking calorically too at that point. And so, there was times in every project, but I don't know. I never really fought depression along the way as much, but there was one time that was kind of funny. In that dark hour, I cut a hole in the kitchen floor so I could access the plumbing. And I was going to have to refloor now the floor and everything. It stacks up. All the punch list is like 7 million miles away at this point. And I reach underneath, and there's some garbage underneath the house. Because when the guys, back in the old days, they'd throw all their trash underneath there when the construction guys got done. And so I'm just pulling this trash out because I just don't want the trash. And I don't know why, but I just couldn't have it in there. And I'm pulling all this stuff out. And one of the things I pull up out of it is half of a cat.
Oh.
It was mummified though, so it wasn't like. But
hopefully, you had some gloves on.
I had gloves on that night, because I'm reaching in, and it's actually the crawl space is so tight that I couldn't actually see in there, so I had to actually just blindly reach in and start grabbing stuff out. And I pull out half this cat, and the thing is, it's 18 inches tall from foot to the top of the head. So I took some photos of it, and I thought that was kind of funny and interesting. And I didn't know it might have been a bobcat for all I know. I mean, it was so damn big.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was. So that was a scary kind of a moment that I had, but I didn't get depressed on that one as much. But it's a roller coaster for sure.
Yeah.
But I didn't let myself think or feel, and maybe that's one of my skills, is that I just kind of kick myself out of that.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. You plow through until you get to the other side, and then you can take a break. And my projects were projects.
Yeah.
I could see a timeline on them where. Your business is like, okay, this is years, maybe even more, maybe Oracle doesn't come back with that second offer.
Right.
Like you guys have endurance. I mean, I'm in and out.
You got to stay in the game. No, you do. And then you got to ride through recessions or cycles. And I'm thinking with some of these latest ones with commercial real estate, and that people in that industry right now are, you're in a bite the bullet type of a phase, or restructure with the bank kind of a phase. And if you have a business that's adjacent to that industry, you're doing the same thing. You're kind of just, you got to ride it out. And so
tough partnerships.
I just think again, when you generalize these things, like it's, there's always exceptions to it, but generally speaking, I did kind of agree with those two conclusions. The first being that I think overall entrepreneurs, you're going to find that you're going to be happier because you're going to have control of your life. And, a long time ago, I read this one study. I remember it was saying, well, what are it talked about the top 3 professions that have the highest rates of I wouldn't say depression, but just sort of like unhappiness is how it characterized. You can throw depression in there. That's kind of a buzzword for these days, but unhappiness or whatever. And they were actually careers where people made a lot of money. One of them was lawyers. Mm-hmm. I think doctors were the next one. And then it went in to talk about, well, why do they have this? And so one of the reasons why the 3 things they said they had, or why, was particularly for lawyers, that they didn't have control over their schedule. So it might be like a Friday night, you're an associate at a law firm, you're leaving and your boss calls you, guess what, man, we got this thing's blowing up. I need you to come in for the weekend. So you had tickets to whatever. And over time, that lack of control isn't disempowering.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so even though you're making this money, that leads you to, and also number two for that same profession was that a lot of them don't know what they're working for. Like they don't know the client, especially like the associates in a law firm, right? So they may be doing this work on an M&A agreement or litigation, just doing research, but if the partner has a relationship with that client, they're the ones talking.
Yeah.
So they're out of touch with, who am I really solving this problem for? So, lack of control, lack of sort of, and so, I think one of the things that weights us up higher, even though it's a struggle, anybody going down this path for this journey, at least you're in control of your day-to-day stuff, how you want to spend it, where you want to focus on. And I guess if it doesn't work out, you only have yourself to blame, you get a point at that, not somebody else that, sabotage your career or whatever, or just burnt you out because of their expectations. Right. And so, I agreed with that premise. And then I also think there's some truth to the other premise, which is, you might expose yourself to, again, word depression, I don't know if I'd use that word, but moments of longer frustration or sadness or whatever, I don't know, despondency because you can't achieve something in the time frame that you want and you're financially in it and you're feeling that financial stress, which is a big one, right? When you accelerate your financial commitment and even like freaking John, talking about his stuff, it's all credit cards, get throwing that, or all these guys, like one form or another, like Chris the other week, Capdevila with his company, second mortgage on the house, right? Already expensive with two kids just starting out. Like, I'm sorry, that's going to make you more stressed, which could then lead to these other sort of, temperaments or expressions of that or whatever.
Of course.
So,
oh yeah.
I don't know. I love getting your take on that because, we're just shoot from the hip on some of this stuff, but I always like to fact check a little bit for how they experience, that time. And I think you mentioned some of those kind of maybe is part of your, I don't know, your Teflon or whatever, is that you're able to push that aside. And again, going back to resilience, I think most entrepreneurs have some pretty high level of opportunistic, type of behavior, or I would say like, they're more positive than cynical. Optimistic is that's what I was looking for. So they're gonna find that, obstacle, but they're gonna be optimistic something's gonna work out in the future. Without that, it's, I don't know. Then every little defeat could bring you down, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, this relentlessness is kind of coming back around and around.
I got to ask you though, like, if you don't have that financial strain, you're still driven, right? But are you as driven?
You mean you're already financially independent? Like you're family money or something?
Yeah, family money. So now you're going to start a company and, you put $250 into it and you're like, well, yeah, I'm trying this idea, but if I lose it, whatever. I got a big trust fund or whatever. I feel, what do you think? I felt like the financial strain was kind of a necessary ingredient in some ways. Because I don't know, like why would you drive? I don't know. It's interesting to me. Do you think that's true, or do you?
Well, what I've observed, and I'm probably wrong half the time on this stuff, but kids that are of that kind of like family money, and then they go out to kick ass in one way or another, and they pull it off, or they don't. They're doing it to prove to their parents that they could have done it without their parents' help. You know what I mean?
When the ones that pull it off,
and the ones that didn't even maybe,
that did, okay,
yeah. I think that I don't know. I would think that you kind of don't want to be. Because with sometimes in family, like family money, there's probably pressure from the parents saying, well, then you're going to do what I'm telling you to do. You're a puppet on my strings. Yeah. And instead, if you go out and kill it financially, then you go, well, actually, I'm not that puppet. I'm an independent human being. And so there's some drive behind that I've seen.
Love that perspective.
That's my only observation with that group. Otherwise, why would you?
Yeah.
Take chances.
That's a great observation, because I always, when you kind of profile it, you're like, the kid coming from not as much financial resources. I mean, I even put you in this category. You got to kind of do it on your own. No one's going to fund this thing. Like, the chip on your shoulder is that I want to get to this place and, put myself in, like you use your story, which is the 5 houses at minimum to sort of, kind of create the cash flow and everything like that. And then you got the other scenario. Okay, someone comes from that wealth. Can they really truly be driven? And I guess as long as you find your, you find your chip, Byard being an exception.
Yeah. The anomaly.
I'm not willing to accept that from him.
No, he's got to come back on. We're going to find that chip, buddy.
Yeah, Byard, if you're listening,
it's there.
You're coming back on. I'm not sure I believe that, So, and I think there's some. I've known him well enough. I'm going to guess that there's something there, and it's going to be. We'll uncover that. It's a little bit more. There's maybe a family dynamic, or I don't know. We'll have to figure that out. But then it gives you hope that you can be successful. I guess. I just feel there's less danger in when you don't have that financial strain. I'm not saying you can do it without, like you and I just discussed, like you can find that other element, but just in my own feeling about it is when you have that financial strain and you put so much of your resources, expose so much and maybe expose, those benefits, to your family too. Like, I don't know, there's just an extra degree where you're like, man, this has gotta work, and maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. You got to at some point walk away, because that could be it's kind of like, the good money after bad thing, what was it? The fallacy, whatever it's called,
sunk cost fallacy.
Sunk cost fallacy. I think John brought that up. Someone brought that up.
John did, yeah.
John brought that up. And there's a risk to that. And frankly, there's the one I walked away from, we didn't have that much into it, but, I'd have a hard time walking away from a lot of things. So I think that could be a real risk point. But at the same time, it's called resiliency, right? So where do you draw the line? How do you draw that line?
I still can't wrap my head around turning down that first deal from Oracle with Chris, and he's first generation from Argentina and slays the dragon, and it was life-changing, he said. I don't know what that number was, but life-changing. Okay, all right. And he walked away. He walked away from that offer, and that just still blows my mind. I mean, I probably would have done cartwheels to take that offer, and maybe too quick to pull out. You know what I mean? You see other people's strengths that way. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, and to your point, it wasn't guaranteed that Oracle or anybody else was going to come back to the table necessarily.
No guarantees. In fact, they said they were going to turn and compete with them.
Turn and compete.
The next day, you got the call. I think that wasn't on when we were recording.
No, you're right. No, they didn't. He said that they were going to compete the next day.
So now you got a competitor that you just turned down a life-changing offer from. I'm like, wow, he must play poker.
Well, so I'm going to put it to something else. I'm going to put it to 2 things I think factor in there. One is that you believe in what you're doing
100%. I
know
you did.
And that there's massive opportunities still in front of you. So that's why I asked the question when he was talking about that. I go, how far were you in your cycle? Right. And he was 4 years into that cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So he knew that in another 4 years he could create even more value. Now he knew you compete with Oracle. That's a little scary, but then Oracle's big. They got a lot of the things they need to do, a lot of priorities. You got this one thing that you're focused on. You can probably win at that one thing. This would be a good question to ask him about. So that was my sort of takeaway from that. So it seems like, that was a big walk away, and it still probably was life-changing, like you said. Now, but with those 2 things going for you, I think that's not as hard a decision as as you might think.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Compare that to this decision, and this is maybe good. Even we're getting close to wrapping this one today, but because what came to mind as you were saying that was this, like the walk away, leave money on the table. We all know about these stories. There was a company back in the 90s. It was called I might get the name wrong, but I'm not going to get the name wrong if you try to acquire them, because I remember reading this story, and it was called Real News or something like that. It was like a data aggregator that sat on your desktop and kind of early part of the web, and so you aggregate these news from different journals, and anyway, so these guys had started this company, built it up, Rupert Murdoch offered them something like $450 million for their business. And they're like, no, that's not, it's worth more than that. It's, we're going big or whatever. They wanted like 650 million. And I'm using numbers that are pretty accurate to this story. I wish I remember the name of the company. I'll go research that and bring that back for another discussion. But so, and then they say, no, it's worth more. So they think, and then, so the deal doesn't happen. And a year or two later, it was a really quick window. We run into the recession of 2001, right? Which was the mainly a tech recession.
Tech bust, yeah.
Oh, just catapult. You know what that company sold for like a year or two later?
I don't want to know. It's going to be really low, right?
You want to know what it sold for?
Yeah.
It was bought by Idea Lab, $6 million.
That's why I think I would take the marshmallow. But sitting here,
but they weren't taking the marshmallow because I believe, without talking to these people, but I believe what was factoring was just an enormous amount of greed.
Yeah.
As opposed to saying, gosh, 20 million would have changed everything for me. Let's say investors owned a bunch of the company too. And so they got whatever, they're going to get 20 million each.
Yeah.
And I could take that and do whatever I needed. Or let's say it's 5. I don't know what the number is, but versus Chris's scenario, which is, I believe in this. I'm early in my cycle. I know I can create more value and they'll be back. I mean, that's what I believe he was operating from versus what these guys were operating, which is just greed. And if you're letting greed control that discussion, like you just think you're going to, it's worth more when it's really not. And then it comes back to bite you.
Yeah.
Because those are heady numbers. It was heady times, and people, they should have taken the chips off when they were there.
Take the damn marshmallow. But I'm probably pretty vulnerable to that. I think I'd be a marshmallow guy, the first one. Maybe I didn't count on the second marshmallow being presented. Let's say I waited, delayed gratification. I spend my 15 minutes waiting, and I spin back around in my chair, and there isn't 2 marshmallows there.
Well, this goes to what you and I were talking about before we jumped on today, which is, I think when we see the pattern recognition of people, like if you were actually put in the seat, let's say you were running, niche tech companies like I did, and I was doing what you did. You could, I think the pattern is you can succeed in any domain if that was your domain. And I don't know if you would have done that if you were in like the domain of Chris and you knew that it had this other upside. Just like you wouldn't sell a real estate investment project if you felt like it was still swinging up. Same reason why you wouldn't buy if it was too high.
Mm-hmm.
Like you kind of know,
you
know the trajectory of your industry. And I think from the outside perspective, like you look at Chris, you're like, well, why wouldn't you do that? And I get why someone would say that, but if you're in there,
yeah,
you know what I mean? You're seeing the pattern within the pattern, right? And
yeah.
so that's the gut call. Now, if you're operating on greed, then you're not listening to the true signals of the market, because all you're listening to is, I'm going to get this much money. I should be worth 600 million when it's clearly not. If a year or two later it sells for 6, right?
The honest feedback, the clear signals is what you said from the market. I think that's a really important thing for anybody that's trying to become an upstart, is to not have delusions of grandeur, to listen to the market, the information it presents. Most of the people that I know that I early on knew that were solid investors or, financially independent or even entrepreneurs were in science. They had science backgrounds. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of a little bit driven toward that science side of things, and so I just had this impression that you almost had to be in science or look at things scientifically. And scientifically is you move one thing, an independent variable, and then you watch this other variable as you're doing the study, and you wait and see, is there anything telling in this information? No. Okay, let's ditch the well, and I feel like business is very similar to that, and in every direction. There's so much information, and there's so much bad information too. Yeah, that people can get caught in Pollyanna thinking, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so
good point.
I get nervous about that. I don't know how that's something somebody could be trained into. Maybe that's not nature and nurture, is it?
I don't know. Well, I think that's a training possibility. This goes back to what you and I started this on. our part of our discussion today was, the pattern recognition, the data crunching, like what does that person look like? And do they have, the Pollyanna thinking is like, kind of way out there success, but you have to be opportunistic. So you have to have some ability to be like, hey man, I think this could be successful. And if I just stick with, but then you also need that other side of that equation, which is that analytical part that tells you, wait a second, you're over invested. You know what I mean? Not like, and I think that's why it's so hard, Eric. It's so hard to find that profile of an individual or set of individuals, which is why I go back to my definition of entrepreneur. I don't think it's necessarily just the founder. It's all these other people that can identify that, hey, maybe the founder's got the right sense of balance in this equation. And they brought in these other teammates I'd like to work with. So we're all entrepreneur together in that case, the company. Or as an individual, they have that profile. And trust me, man, I'm looking for all those types of data points if I'm thinking about investing in something or whatever. Can they bring the rational thinking into sort of blunt the opportunistic thinking?
Yeah. And you see business guys over time, they come across real blunt.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think they were probably that way going into it, but after they got beat up by the streets after a while, they're just like, no, this is how this works. I've seen it enough times, and I've seen how it goes sideways, and it can shape a person into a little bit of a blunt way. It doesn't always, but I kind of like those straight talkers. You know what I mean? That are that way.
No, 100%. Or if you're sort of self-aware enough, and you're not that person per se, like say you're an entrepreneur, you're just not that person. You're kind of the visionary. Like even Bard was kind of telling this. He was saying, the CEO that his partner was the guy that got in front of the company was, the person that was able to kind of carry the room or whatever.
Yeah.
And he was sort of the rationale CEO operator.
Yeah.
Then you find your complement, right? Yeah. To make sure you have those things covered as you sort of move forward, which is one of the reasons why I always liked having co-founders. Like some people like to operate independently, and I get that. But I wanted to try to get some skills that I felt we would need to be successful, and maybe even countermine, like for the stuff that I want to say I didn't want to do, but I just maybe wasn't good at. I could get done, but it would be not as fun.
Yeah.
And someone else would do it and actually enjoy doing it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So those are, yeah.
It's the nuance is kind of maybe what I'm, now that we've been talking long enough about this, there's some of the nuance in the details of some of the characters we've had along the way so far that I like. And like Chris said, you have to be a little bit crazy to start a business or to be an entrepreneur. And I kind of hung my hat on that for a while because I like that talking point, kind of, you have to be a little bit crazy.
Yeah.
And then, so I was like, well, can the opposite be true? Can you be extremely crazy and be really good in business? And the problem is that, yeah, you can't. And so I'm like, damn it. It's really hard to have these solid hooks that you can hang something on and go, it's definitive. But I think that the higher probability of an individual to do well is if they're kind of crazy and they're kind of rational and they're kind of optimistic and they can adjust and they're sort of in the middle of all those. There's probably a higher probability of them doing well, that kind of a character doing well, than if they're just nuts and they're just throwing spaghetti against the wall to see what will stick. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense, man. And I think I like that. I think that's a great place to wrap it, actually, because, it's a little bit of everything is what you're sort of suggesting, of all those sort of temperaments. And I don't know if that goes to emotional IQ or how you want to sort of frame it up, but then there's always going to be the super crazy that do the super big things.
Yeah.
You and I talking about this podcast and what's sort of the lane that we're trying to be in, right? Kind of the $0 to $200 million company. I think that represents more the person that you're talking about than the big hitter. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a route to go to. And if that's just how you're wired, I still think it's good for those people to find those complements that can ground them so they don't make the massive mistakes they might make, even though that massive vision, we need some of those in society, right? Like the Ubers or whatever of the world, right? No, every car, forget the tax thing. I know I can take on this thing, and like it's going to cost. I'm going to need 100 million right out of the gate. Yeah, those are big problems. You probably are going to need, and you're going to, only one, company is going to own that space, maybe two, and so yeah, there's. I like that, dude. I think for the lane that we're in, and that was well said.
I sure appreciated the way he said that. You got to be a little bit crazy, yeah. And man, if you're not crazy at all, I suppose there's people that start businesses in that niche too, and do real well. It's not, at some point you got to get pushed over the edge. One last little story just before we're kind of wrapping up is Jeff didn't tell this story when he was here, Jeff Maggie, but he called up at one point and said, "What are you up to?" And I was showing my nephew a house in Redmond, and it was the first house he'd ever looked at, and it was a great deal, and it was just such a no-brainer. But we knew that he wasn't ready financially to do it, and it was just going to be part of the dress rehearsal. So you can look back on this and go, "Well, I wish I would have done this."
Yeah.
And then once you see that a few times, then you realize, okay, I should just do this one. RFN,
Yeah, right.
Well, Jeff goes, "This is a good deal." I go, "Yeah, it's absolutely a good deal." He goes, "All right, well then tell Derek that I'll finance it for 2 years at whatever percent." And I said, "Well, you tell him." So he called Derek that night, and Derek and him talked, and Derek goes, "Okay, well that sounds all great and everything. Can I sleep on it?" And Jeff goes, "Nope. You're not going to know anything new tomorrow morning that you don't know now." RFN.
Yeah.
And then Derek said yes.
Forced to get decision,
But yeah,
don't talk yourself out of it. Here's someone telling you, that it's a good deal. I love it, dude.
Like a cattle prod, that guy.
Yeah.
Can I sleep on it? No. I mean, I just love that story.
Deal expires in 24 hours.
Yeah, and Derek said yes, and it's got hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity in it.
Yeah.
And he's young, and he used that as a platform to jump off on another one. So anyway, it was just
love it. That's cool.
Jeff, when he says RFN, like there's no BS in there. Like he's that guy, and he's that guy with other people. He told me to sell my GTO.
Yeah.
And he's like, sell it right now, sell it yesterday. Yeah. And that's just another one of those of the people we've talked to. I had to tell that story though.
Love it. That's good, man. That's good. That's a great wrap on that. I'm gonna have when we talk to Jeff again, I want to sort of get into where that's kind of bit him in the butt. When it hasn't worked out.
Absolutely.
Because obviously the patterns worked out for him and I in a big way. So that'd be fun to kind of circle back on that. But man, thanks for that, Eric. And hey, listen up. We're wrapping up here today. Pete and Eric, next week, we have a person on that it'll be a really interesting story. This guy grew a business, a restaurant chain business. I mean, nationwide, big financing from Blackrock. I think there's ups and downs to that. Eric's not going to be able to join me on that one, but Chris Capdevila will be joining. Eric's doing the good lifestyle balance thing. You're going rafting somewhere.
Yeah, rafting the John Day.
There you go.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty good too.
Multi-night trip. And, you get out there with the stars and, you get a sense of perspective for sure.
For those of you who haven't heard of the John Day or know where it's at, look it up, check it out. It's a pretty special place, but just don't go there.
No, don't go there. And you go to nowhere and you take a left, and it's even further than that. BFE.
All right. Love it. Catch you.